coffee grew cold before she even registered that he wasn't showing up. Booth 7, empty for the first time in 3 years. Then the diner door swung open. 2 hulking bodyguards and a man in a black suit. His eyes were pure violence, and he waited for some unseen permission. He didn't order anything. He just stared at her. "You're Mabel Rossi," he stated. Not a question, more of an accusation. Her voice hitched in her throat. "Yes. You've been helping my father." Just like that, an act of kindness had become the most dangerous thing she had ever offered. What if the loneliest man in her diner wasn't broken by the world, but by the very empire he had built on blood and regret? Mabel Rossi was 26 years old, running on fumes, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. Kindness didn't cost a thing, so she gave it away freely. Her recipient was Vincent, a quiet ghost who wore the same brown fedora every morning and sat by the window like he was waiting for death to finally remember his address. She poured his coffee without him having to ask, cut his toast into neat triangles, and spoke to him like he mattered. She figured he was just another forgotten soul. She had no idea his name was written in blood all over Brooklyn. She didn't know that his silence was his armor. And she definitely didn't know that his son, the youngest and most ruthless mafia boss in the city, was about to walk through that door with murder in his eyes and 2 bodyguards at his back. Because one cold Tuesday morning, Vincent's usual booth sat empty. And when the door finally opened, it wasn't for coffee. It was for her. The bell above Luna's diner jingled its tired song at 5:30 a.m. Mabel Rossi was already behind the counter, tying her apron with practiced efficiency. The diner was a relic. Cracked vinyl booths the color of dried blood, linoleum that stayed sticky no matter how hard she scrubbed, and a permanent smell of burnt coffee and broken dreams hanging in the air. For 3 years, this had been her stage. She moved through the narrow aisles with a grace born of necessity, carrying plates, refilling cups, and manufacturing warmth, even when her own heart felt like it was frozen solid. At 26, she was drowning slowly in her mother's leftover medical bills and rent that climbed faster than her tips. Her art supplies sat in boxes she couldn't bring herself to open. The morning regulars filtered in like clockwork. Sal, the taxi driver, always ordered 2 eggs over easy. The nurses from Mercy Hospital traded horror stories over pancakes. The construction crew rolled in, loud and hungry. And at exactly 7:30 a.m., Vincent Callie shuffled through the door. Same brown fedora, same soft gray coat, same worn leather shoes whispering against the floor. He never acknowledged anyone, just made his way to booth 7 by the window, the one that caught the morning light through the rain-streaked glass. Vincent was different from the others. He was a ghost trying to disappear in plain sight. Lou, her perpetually stressed boss, had warned her the first day. "Don't waste your charm on him. He doesn't talk, doesn't tip. Just give him black coffee and move on." Brenda, the veteran waitress with the disposition of a rattlesnake, had been more direct. "That booth could seat 4 people during rush hour. Instead, we get Mr. Sunshine hogging prime real estate." But Mabel saw something else. She saw hands that trembled as they reached for the sugar. She saw eyes that stared out the window, searching for something that would never come back. She saw loneliness she recognized in her own mirror. So, she ignored Lou's advice. "Good morning," she said that first day, placing his coffee down gently. Vincent grunted, didn't look up. For 2 weeks, she tried, smiled, made conversation with silence, and brought him fresh coffee before he even asked. Then, one Monday, Mabel noticed his arthritic fingers struggling with the butter knife, trembling as he tried to cut his toast. His jaw clenched in frustration and shame. She didn't think. She just acted. "Here, let me help with that." Vincent's hands froze. For the first time, he looked up, really looked at her. His gray eyes were like storm clouds, carrying decades of untold stories. Mabel cut his toast into 4 perfect triangles. Neat, manageable, kind. The diner noise faded into silence. Vincent's voice came out like gravel and smoke. "Thank you, miss." 2 words, but they landed like a benediction. "You're welcome. I'm Mabel." He nodded once, sharp, deliberate. Something had shifted. Some wall had cracked. From that morning forward, it became their ritual. She'd cut his toast without asking. He'd nod his thanks. Sometimes he'd mention the weather. Once, he told her the rain reminded him of his late wife. Another time, he noticed her doodle on the order pad. "You're talented," he'd said quietly. The compliment stayed with her for days. To everyone else, Vincent remained invisible. To Lou, barely worth the register space. To Brenda, a daily irritation. But to Mabel, Vincent became proof that small kindnesses mattered. That even in a world this hard, there was room for gentleness. She had no idea she was pouring coffee for a man who'd once ruled Brooklyn's underworld. She had no idea Vincent Callie was a name whispered in dark rooms. She had no idea his son was coming. Because one Tuesday morning, Vincent's booth stayed empty. The coffee she'd poured at 7:28 sat cooling, untouched. And at 7:45, 3 men in expensive suits stepped through the door. The leader's eyes swept the room and landed on Mabel. He walked toward her with dangerous confidence. "You're Mabel," he said. Not a question, an accusation. "Yes, you've been helping my father." And Mabel understood. Kindness had just become the most dangerous thing she'd ever offered. The man standing before Mabel radiated danger the way the sun radiates heat. Constant, inescapable, impossible to ignore. Frank Callie didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone had turned Luna's diner into a held breath. "My father," he repeated, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "Vincent Callie, you've been taking care of him." Mabel's fingers tightened around the coffee pot. Her mind raced through every morning, every cut triangle of toast, every quiet conversation. The weight of his stare made her feel like she'd committed a crime she didn't even know existed. I just served him breakfast," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's all." Something flickered across Frank's face, surprise maybe, that she'd spoken at all. Most people, she suspected, didn't talk back to him. They just moved out of his way and prayed he'd forget they existed. "That's all." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You cut his food, talked to him like he mattered, made him feel human again." He paused, and the silence felt like falling. "Do you know what that makes you? A waitress doing her job. Dangerous." The word hung between them like smoke. Behind Frank, his bodyguards remained perfectly still, hands folded, eyes scanning the room with the efficiency of men trained to identify threats before they materialized. Mabel's heart hammered against her ribs, but something in her refused to break. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was 3 years of swallowing her pride for lousy tips and groping hands. Maybe it was just that she had so little left to lose. "Where is he?" she asked quietly. "Vincent. He's never missed a morning." Frank's expression shifted, a crack in the marble. For just a moment, she saw grief flicker across his face before the mask returned. "That's not your concern." "He's my customer. He's my—" He stopped himself before saying friend, because what were they really? A waitress and a silent old man who'd found comfort in routine. But Frank caught it anyway. His jaw tightened. "Your friend," he finished for her, and the word sounded like an accusation. "My father doesn't have friends. He has ghosts. He has regrets. He stopped, shook his head as if clearing it. "He's in the hospital. Heart attack 2 days ago." The coffee pot nearly slipped from Mabel's hands. Will he be okay?" "He's alive." Frank pulled a crisp $100 bill from his pocket and placed it on the counter with precise, controlled movements. "For his breakfasts. All of them. Consider his tab closed." It felt like a dismissal, like payment for services rendered. The way you'd settle an account before closing a business relationship forever. "I don't want your money," Mabel heard herself say. Frank's eyes narrowed. "Everyone wants my money. I wanted to help him. There's a difference." For a long moment, Frank just stared at her. The diner remained frozen. Sal's eggs getting cold. The construction crew suddenly fascinated by their plates. Even Brenda silent for once in her miserable life. Then Frank leaned forward just slightly and lowered his voice. People who help my father have a habit of discovering things they shouldn't, of asking questions that get them hurt. So here's what's going to happen, Mabel Rossi. Her name in his mouth sounded like a threat and a promise. You're going to take this money. You're going to forget Vincent ever sat in that booth. And you're going to pretend this conversation never happened. And if I don't? His smile was winter. Then you'll find out why people cross the street when they see me coming. He straightened, turned toward the door. His bodyguards moved in perfect synchronization. The bell jingled as they prepared to leave. Mr. Callie? Mabel called out, surprising herself. He paused, didn't turn around. Tell Vincent. Her voice caught. Tell him his toast will be waiting. Whenever he's ready. Frank's shoulders tensed. For 3 heartbeats he stood there, a statue in an expensive suit. Then, without turning, without acknowledging her words, he walked out into the gray morning. The door closed, the spell broke. Sound rushed back into Luna's. Silverware clinking, conversations resuming. Lou yelling something about orders backing up, but Mabel couldn't move. She stared at the $100 bill on the counter, at Vincent's empty booth by the window, at the rain that had started falling harder now, streaking down the glass like tears. Brenda appeared at her elbow. Girl, do you have any idea who that was? Mabel shook her head. That, Brenda whispered, eyes wide, was Frank Callie. The Frank Callie. He runs half of Brooklyn. People who cross him end up in the river. Mabel looked down at the $100 bill, then at Vincent's booth, then at the rain, and she knew with the certainty of thunder following lightning that her life had just become very, very complicated. 3 days passed like bruises. Slow, painful, deepening with time. Mabel couldn't stop thinking about Vincent's empty booth. Every morning at 7:30, she'd pour a cup of coffee out of habit, then stare at it cooling by the window until Lou barked at her to stop wasting product. She'd tucked Frank's $100 bill into her apron pocket, unable to spend it, unable to throw it away. It felt like blood money, like a severance package for a relationship she'd never agreed to end. The diner felt different now, smaller, like the walls had moved closer when she wasn't looking. Brenda watched her with a mixture of pity and fascination. You're mooning over a mobster's daddy, she'd said on day 2, refilling salt shakers. That's a Lifetime movie waiting to happen, and not one of the good ones. But Mabel couldn't explain it. Vincent had been more than a customer. He'd been a reminder that kindness still mattered, that small gestures could bridge chasms of loneliness. Losing him felt like losing proof that her life meant something beyond balancing plates and forcing smiles. On the 4th morning, Mabel arrived at 5:30 to find something waiting on the diner's doorstep. A brown fedora? Vincent's fedora. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The felt was soft, worn smooth by years of handling. Inside the band, she found a small piece of paper folded into a square. Her name was written on it in shaky handwriting. Asterisk Mabel, you reminded an old man what love once felt like. If my son ever finds peace, it will be because of you. The world made him hard. Please don't let it make you the same. With gratitude, Vincent. Asterisk, she read it 3 times, standing in the pre-dawn darkness, tears blurring the words. It felt like a goodbye, like a benediction and a warning wrapped together. Inside the diner, she placed the fedora on the shelf behind the counter, next to the coffee filters and the dusty plastic flowers some waitress who'd been Vincent's late wife had put there a decade ago. It felt right keeping Vincent close, even if just in memory. The morning shift began. Sal came in for his eggs. The nurses ordered their pancakes. The construction crew arrived loud as always, but at 7:30, Vincent's booth remained empty. At 7:45, the bell above the door chimed. Mabel looked up, hope fluttering stupidly in her chest. Maybe Vincent had recovered. Maybe he was coming back. But it wasn't Vincent. It was Frank Callie, alone this time. No bodyguards, no intimidating entourage. Just him in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent, standing in the doorway like he was trying to decide whether to stay or run. The diner didn't go silent this time. Most people hadn't seen him before, didn't recognize the danger. They just kept eating, kept talking, kept living their ordinary lives while something extraordinary unfolded. Frank's eyes found hers immediately. He walked to the counter with less confidence than before, like each step cost him something. "Coffee," he said. His voice was rougher than she remembered. Tired. Mabel grabbed a mug, not the chipped blue one Vincent preferred, but close, and poured. Her hands were steady. She was getting good at performing calm while her insides screamed. "Black, 2 sugars," she said, remembering how Vincent took his. Frank's expression cracked just slightly. "You remember?" "I remember all my regulars." "I'm not a regular." "Then why are you here?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Frank wrapped both hands around the mug as if drawing warmth from it, even though the diner was stifling. "My father woke up yesterday," he said finally. "Asked about you." First thing he said when he opened his eyes. "Is the girl with the kind smile okay?" Frank's jaw tightened. "He was dying, and he was worried about you." Mabel's throat constricted. "Can I see him?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you're a complication." Frank looked up, and his eyes were devastation wrapped in expensive tailoring. "My father spent 5 years hiding from his past. From me. From what our family became. And you—" He stopped, shook his head. "You made him want to stay in this world. Do you understand how dangerous that is?" "Dangerous for who?" "For you." The words came out harsh. "My enemies don't care about waitresses with kind smiles. They care about leverage, weaknesses. And my father just announced to a hospital full of people that you matter to him." Mabel set down the coffee pot with deliberate care. "I didn't ask for this." "Neither did he." "Neither did I." Frank stood abruptly, pulled out his wallet. "Stay away from my father. Stay away from me. Forget booth 7. "Vincent sat in booth 7, Mabel interrupted. "And I'm not forgetting him just because you're scared." Frank's eyes went dark. "I'm not scared." "Then what are you?" "Smart enough to know that people around my family don't survive kindness." He dropped 2 20s on the counter and walked out. But this time he left his coffee unfinished, and Mabel knew he'd be back. Frank Callie returned the next morning, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Each time he came alone. Each time he ordered black coffee with 2 sugars. Each time he sat at the counter instead of Vincent's booth, close enough to watch Mabel work, far enough to maintain the illusion of distance. He never stayed long. 20 minutes, maybe 30. He'd drink his coffee in silence, leave exact change, and walk out without a word. But his presence filled the diner like smoke. Thick, inescapable, changing the air itself. By the 5th morning, Brenda was practically vibrating with curiosity. "That's Frank Callie," she hissed while they prepped for the breakfast rush. "Coming here every day like we're Starbucks. Do you know what this means?" "That he likes our coffee?" Mabel kept her voice light, but her hands trembled slightly as she stacked plates. "It means he's interested. And when men like Frank Callie get interested in girls like you—" Brenda's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper. "People end up as headlines." Mabel wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because Brenda was right about one thing. Frank was interested. Not romantically, at least. She didn't think so. It was something else, something that felt like he was trying to solve a puzzle. And she was the piece that didn't fit anywhere. On the 6th morning, Frank broke the silence. "Why'd you do it?" he asked as she refilled his cup. Mabel didn't pretend not to understand. "Because he looked lonely. Lots of people look lonely. You don't cut their food." His hands shook. He needed help. "And you just helped, without wanting anything in return." Frank said it like he was describing something impossible. A unicorn, a miracle. That's generally how kindness works. His laugh was bitter. "Not in my world." Mabel set down the coffee pot and leaned against the counter, studying him. Up close, the fear people felt made sense. Frank Callie was carved from contradictions. Beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, controlled in a way that suggested violence constantly held in check. His suit was impeccable. His hands were scarred. "Then maybe," she said quietly, "your world is smaller than you think. Something flickered across his face. Anger maybe, or recognition. You don't know anything about my world. I know your father tried to leave it. I know he found peace in a diner booth and burnt toast. I know. She stopped herself. What? Frank leaned forward. What do you know? I know you're here every morning drinking coffee you probably don't even like. Asking questions you're afraid to hear the answers to. Mabel held his gaze. So why don't you just ask what you really want to know? The diner hummed around them. Sal reading his sports page. The nurses gossiping. The construction crew arguing about last night's game. Normal people living normal lives while Mabel stood across from Brooklyn's most feared crime boss, daring him to be honest. Frank's voice dropped so low she almost didn't hear it. What did he talk about when you were with him? The question cracked something open in her chest. Because that's what this was really about. Not protection, not threats. A son desperate to understand the father who'd abandoned him. He talked about the rain, Mabel said softly. How it reminded him of your mother. How she used to dance in it when you were small. Before she stopped, before I ruined everything. Frank finished, his voice hollow. He didn't say that. He said you had her eyes. That when you were 5, you used to collect pennies to buy her flowers from the bodega on the corner. Mabel watched emotions war across Frank's face. He said loving you was the easiest thing he'd ever done, and losing you was the hardest. Frank's jaw clenched. His hands wrapped around the coffee mug had gone white at the knuckles. He left me, he said finally. Built an empire with my bare hands. Became exactly what he raised me to be. And he just left. Disappeared like I was nothing. Maybe he left because you became what he was most afraid of. The words hung between them like a detonation. Frank stood abruptly, the stool scraping harshly against the linoleum. For a moment, Mabel thought he might explode, violence radiating off him in waves. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath, but he just pulled out his wallet, dropped a 50 on the counter. Keep the change, he said, voice tight, and stop trying to save people who don't want to be saved. He turned toward the door. Frank. He stopped, didn't turn around. Your father does want to be saved, Mabel said. That's why he's asking about me. That's why he left you that letter. What letter? The one he made me promise to give you, when you were ready. Frank finally turned, and his expression was devastation. I'll never be ready. Then I guess I'll be waiting. He left without another word, but Mabel saw the slight hesitation before he walked out, the crack in his armor growing wider. She'd seen that look before on Vincent's face, the first time she'd cut his toast. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a nurse from Mercy Hospital, who looked uncomfortable holding it, like it might explode in her hands. Mr. Callie asked me to bring this to you, she said, glancing nervously around the diner. He was very insistent, said it had to be you specifically, the waitress with the kind smile. Mabel's hands trembled as she took the envelope. It was thin, cream-colored, expensive paper that felt wrong in her calloused fingers. Her name was written across the front in Vincent's shaky handwriting, the same script from the note in his fedora. She waited until her shift ended, until she was alone in her shoebox apartment with its water-stained ceiling and boxes of abandoned art supplies, before she opened it. Dearest Mabel, I am writing this with hands that barely remember how to hold a pen. So forgive me if my words wander like an old man's mind. You reminded me what love once felt like. Not the violent kind, the kind that builds empires and destroys enemies. The quiet kind, the kind my Maria had. The kind that cuts toast into triangles and asks about dreams without expecting anything in return. My son doesn't remember that kind of love. He only knows the other. The kind that takes and demands and breaks. I made him that way. I built him from blood and fear. And then I ran from what I'd created. But he wasn't always a monster. Once he was a boy who collected pennies for his mother, who cried when birds fell from trees, who wanted to be a teacher of all things. Can you imagine? Frank Callie teaching children about books and numbers instead of ledgers and bodies. I took that boy and buried him under concrete and rage. When I'm gone, and Mabel, I will be gone soon. Hearts like mine don't get many warnings. Someone needs to help him remember. Not to fix him, not to save him, just to remind him that the boy isn't completely dead. I think you might be the only person brave enough or foolish enough. That's enough. I haven't decided what enough is yet, though. There's something Frank doesn't know. Something I've kept hidden for 5 years, because knowing it would destroy whatever shred of humanity he has left. His mother, my Maria, she didn't die in some crossfire. She wasn't killed by enemies or caught in violence meant for me. She took her own life. She discovered what Frank had become. The rumors reached her, whispers of brutality, of executions, of a son who'd surpassed his own father in cruelty. She confronted him one night, begged him to stop. He told her it was too late, that this was just who he was now. 3 days later, I found her in our bedroom. Pills, a note that said only, "I cannot watch my son become death itself." I told Frank it was a rival family. Gave him a target for his rage. I watched him build an empire on that lie because I was too cowardly to tell him the truth. That his mother couldn't survive loving what he'd become. He thinks his violence was justice. It was grief eating itself alive. When I'm gone, give him the second letter. The one she wrote, the one I've been too afraid to share. Help him see what love really was. Not possession, not protection, just love. You have that in you, Mabel. I saw it in how you held my coffee cup like it actually mattered. How you spoke to me like I was a human being. Maybe you can do the same for my son. With all the gratitude my broken heart can hold. Vincent. Mabel read it 3 times. Tears streamed down her face. Her hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. Inside the envelope was a second, smaller one, sealed. Addressed in different handwriting, feminine, elegant, to my beloved Francesco. Maria's letter. The truth Frank had spent 5 years running from. Mabel held it like it was made of glass and dynamite. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Frank's face when he'd asked what Vincent talked about. The hollowness in his eyes. The way he'd said, "I'll never be ready," like he was sentencing himself. At 3 a.m. She stood at her window watching the street below. Rain fell in sheets, turning the Brooklyn night into liquid darkness. A black car sat across the street, engine off, headlights dark. But someone was inside, watching her building, watching her window. Mabel's heart stuttered. She knew without even seeing his face who it was. Frank Callie, sitting in the rain at 3 o'clock in the morning, staring at the apartment of a waitress who'd promised to deliver a letter that would break him. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. In the car below, she saw the brief flare of a lighter, the glow of a cigarette. Then the engine started. The car pulled away, swallowed by rain and darkness. But Mabel knew he'd be back, because some storms don't pass. They just gather strength. Frank stopped pretending he came for the coffee. It started subtly, arriving earlier, staying longer, asking questions that had nothing to do with his father. He'd watch Mabel work with an intensity that made her skin prickle, like he was trying to solve an equation that kept changing variables. "Why do you stay here?" he asked one morning, gesturing at the diner's cracked vinyl and flickering lights. "You're smart, talented. Vincent showed me the sketches you drew on napkins." Mabel's hands paused mid-pour. "He kept those. He kept everything you touched." Frank's voice was quiet, like you were proof of something. Proof of what? That good people still existed. The words landed soft but heavy, like snow that would later become an avalanche. Their conversations became a rhythm. He'd arrive at 7:30, Vincent's time, and sit at the counter. She'd pour his coffee. They'd talk in the spaces between orders, building something fragile and unnamed between the breakfast rush and burnt toast. He told her about the boy who'd wanted to teach, about his mother's laugh, about the day everything changed when he'd watched his father nearly beaten to death and decided fear was better than love. She told him about art school, about her mother's slow death, about paintings she couldn't afford to finish, and dreams she'd buried under practicality. "You should paint again," Frank said one morning, his voice carrying an unexpected gentleness. "With what money?" He pulled out his wallet. "Don't," Mabel said sharply. "Don't do that." "Do what?" Try to fix things with cash. I'm not a problem you can throw money at. Frank's jaw tightened. Everyone else is. Then maybe that's the problem. The diner had started noticing. Sal watched over his newspaper with knowing eyes. Brenda whispered theories to anyone who'd listen. Even Lou, perpetually oblivious, had commented on their intense little coffee clutches. But it was the customers from Frank's world who worried Mabel most. She'd see them sometimes, men in dark cars parked outside, watching through tinted windows. Once a man in an expensive suit came in, ordered nothing, and stared at her for 10 minutes before leaving. His eyes had been cold calculation. "They're checking you out," Brenda said nervously. "Frank's people making sure you're not, I don't know, a cop, a threat. I'm a waitress. You're whatever Frank Callie says you are. And right now he's saying you matter." The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. One morning, Frank arrived with blood on his knuckles. He tried to hide it, keeping his right hand in his pocket, but Mabel saw the split skin, the bruising already purpling beneath his expensive shirt cuff. What happened? She reached for his hand before thinking better of it. Frank pulled away instinctively. "Business. That's not business. That's violence. In my world, they're the same thing." Mabel grabbed the first aid kit Lou kept behind the counter, mostly for burns and knife cuts, but it would work. "Sit." "I'm fine. You're bleeding on my counter. Sit." Something in her voice made him obey. He sat on the stool like a scolded child while Mabel cleaned his knuckles with antiseptic. His hands were surprisingly elegant, long fingers, careful scars. The hands of someone who'd built empires and broken bones in equal measure. "Someone said something they shouldn't have," Frank said quietly. "About you." Mabel's hand stilled. "About me? That you were accessible. That maybe I'd lost interest. That they could." His jaw clenched. "I made sure they understood their mistake." "Frank." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "You can't hurt people who talk about me." "Why not?" "Because that's not protection. That's possession." "What's the difference?" The question hung between them, raw and honest. "Protection means keeping me safe," Mabel said softly, still holding his damaged hand. "Possession means controlling who gets near me. One is love. The other is fear." Frank stared at their joined hands, her small, calloused fingers wrapped around his bruised knuckles. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to do the first one." "Then learn." "What if I can't?" Mabel squeezed his hand gently. "Then at least you tried." For a moment the diner disappeared. The clatter of dishes, Brenda's commentary, Lou yelling, all of it faded into background noise. There was only this. A waitress holding the hand of a monster, trying to find the man underneath. Frank lifted his other hand, hesitated, then touched her cheek with his fingertips. The gesture was so tentative, so uncertain, it broke something in her chest. "You're the only thing in my life that doesn't hurt," he whispered. Before Mabel could respond, the diner door opened. A man stepped inside, tall, scarred, radiating menace. "Frank," he said, "we have a problem." Frank's expression shuddered instantly. The vulnerable man disappeared, replaced by the boss Brooklyn feared. He stood, pulled his hand from hers. "Stay here," he ordered. Then he walked out into whatever violence waited. And Mabel understood. Loving Frank Callie meant watching him walk toward danger and not being able to follow. Would you risk loving the man everyone fears? Subscribe if you believe even monsters deserve a second chance. Refuse and drop your reasons in the comments. But be honest. What scares you more, him or your heart? The call came at 2 a.m. Mabel woke to her phone buzzing against the nightstand. The screen was too bright in the darkness. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Nothing good happened at 2 a.m. But something made her pick up. "Mabel Rossi?" A woman's voice. Professional. Tired. "Yes. This is Mercy Hospital. Vincent Callie has been asking for you. He's..." A pause. "He's asking you to come now. It's important." Mabel was dressed and out the door in 5 minutes. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation. A nurse led her through fluorescent corridors to the ICU, where Vincent lay in a bed that made him look impossibly small. Tubes ran from his arms. Machines beeped steady rhythms. His fedora sat on the side table. Someone had brought it, probably Frank. Vincent's eyes opened when she entered. They were clearer than she expected. "Mabel," he rasped. "You came." She pulled a chair close, took his trembling hand. "Of course I came. Where's Frank?" "I don't know. They only called me." Vincent's expression tightened with something like pain. "Good. Need to tell you first before he comes." Each word seemed to cost him. "The letter. Did you read it?" "Yes." "Then you know about Maria, about the lie." His grip strengthened slightly. "But there's more. Something I didn't write. Something he needs to hear from someone he trusts." "Vincent, you should rest." "No time for rest." His laugh became a cough. "Dying men don't rest, they confess." Mabel squeezed his hand gently. Vincent's eyes fixed on the ceiling, seeing something or someone she couldn't. "Frank thinks his empire was built on justice. Revenge for his mother. But it was built on my cowardice. I gave him a target because I couldn't give him the truth. He needs to hear this from you. He won't listen. Not to me. I'm the man who abandoned him." Vincent turned his head, meeting her gaze. "But you're the woman who showed him kindness without wanting power. That's why he keeps coming back. Not for coffee, for proof that he's still human." "I don't know if I can." "The letter from Maria, when you give it to him." Vincent's breathing became labored. "Stay with him. Don't let him be alone when his world collapses. Promise me." "I promise." The door opened. Frank stepped inside, and the temperature dropped. He looked from Mabel to his father, jaw tight. "What's going on, Francesco?" Vincent said softly, using his full name, the one his mother had given him. Frank flinched like he'd been struck. "I need to tell you something before." Vincent gestured weakly at the machines. "Before it's too late." Frank moved closer, his usual confidence stripped away, leaving only a son facing his father's death. Mabel started to stand to give them privacy, but Vincent's hand tightened on hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Please." She sat back down, caught between them. "Your mother—" Vincent began, his voice gaining strange strength. "What I told you about her death. It was a lie." Frank went perfectly still. "What?" "There was no rival family, no attack, no enemy." Each word landed like a stone. "She took her own life, Francesco, because of what you'd become." The machines kept beeping. The fluorescent lights kept humming, but the world had stopped. "No." Frank's voice was hollow. "You're lying." "I wish I was." Vincent's eyes filled with tears. "She found out what you were doing. The violence, the executions. She begged you to stop. Do you remember? 5 years ago, she came to you crying, asking you to walk away." Frank's face had gone white. "She said it was too much, that I'd gone too far. I told her." His voice cracked. "I told her it was too late to change. 3 days later, I found her." Vincent's tears fell freely now. Pills and a note. She wrote that she couldn't watch her son become death itself. Frank staggered backward like he'd been shot. His hand found the wall for support. "I gave you a lie," Vincent continued, "because I was a coward, because I thought your rage would be easier than your guilt. I let you build an empire on grief that should have been. Mabel finished quietly, mourning. Vincent nodded. "I'm sorry, my son. I'm so sorry." Frank couldn't speak, couldn't move. He just stood there, breaking in slow motion. Every piece of certainty he'd built his life on crumbling. "She left you a letter," Mabel said softly. "Your mother? I have it." Frank's eyes found hers, devastated, lost, searching for something to hold on to. 5 years, he whispered. "Everything I did, everyone I hurt, it was all." His voice shattered. "It was all for nothing." "No," Vincent said. "Not nothing. You can still choose. While there's time, choose to be the man she wanted." The teacher, the boy with pennies. Frank slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold hospital floor, head in his hands. And for the first time since she'd met him, Mabel saw Frank Callie cry. Frank didn't leave the hospital for 3 days. He slept in the chair beside Vincent's bed, refused food, barely spoke. Mabel brought him coffee from Luna's, black, 2 sugars, and sat with him in the terrible silence. Sometimes Vincent was awake, sometimes sedated, but Frank remained, a statue carved from guilt and grief. On the 3rd night, Vincent passed quietly. No dramatic goodbye, no final wisdom, just a breath that didn't come back, machines that suddenly screamed, and nurses who moved with practiced efficiency while Frank stood frozen, unable to process that the man he'd spent 5 years running from was gone. Mabel held his hand through it all, felt it turn cold as the weight of everything settled on his shoulders. The funeral was small. Frank had wanted it that way. No spectacle, no parade of criminals paying respects to a man they'd feared. Just a quiet ceremony at a cemetery on the edge of Brooklyn where Maria was buried. Mabel stood beside Frank as they lowered Vincent into the ground. He wore a black suit that fit perfectly but looked wrong on him, like armor that no longer served its purpose. His face was a mask, but his hand trembled in hers. When it was over, when the last mourners had drifted away, Frank finally spoke. "I need to read it. My mother's letter." Mabel had been carrying it for days, waiting. She pulled the envelope from her purse. Maria's elegant handwriting, still pristine despite the years Vincent had kept it hidden. Frank took it with shaking hands. For a long moment, he just stared at his name written in his mother's script. Then he opened it. Mabel watched emotions cascade across his face as he read shock, pain, understanding, devastation. When he finished, he read it again, then a 3rd time, as if repetition might change the words. Finally, he handed it to Mabel. "Read it, please, out loud." Her voice trembled as she began. "My beloved Francesco, if you're reading this, then I am gone. And your father has finally found the courage to give you truth instead of comfort. I want you to know that leaving was not your fault. It was mine. I was too weak to watch you become what this life demanded. Too soft to understand that survival sometimes requires hardness. But I also need you to know this. The boy I raised, the one who saved injured birds, who read books until dawn, who wanted to teach children because he believed in their goodness, that boy is not dead. He is buried, yes, hidden under layers of violence and necessity, but not dead. I see him sometimes in your eyes when you think no one is watching, in the way you still knock on wood for luck, in how you close your eyes when you laugh just like you did as a child. Your father built you into a weapon. This life sharpened you into something terrible. But Francesco, my sweet boy, you chose to stay sharp. Every day you make that choice. I cannot watch you choose darkness anymore. It breaks my heart in ways that have no repair. So I am choosing peace, and I am begging you from whatever comes after this to choose light. Not for me, not for your father, for the boy who collected pennies, for the man he could still become. Walk away, my son. Please walk away before there's nothing left of you to save. With all the love a mother's heart can hold, Maria." Silence filled the cemetery. Even the wind had stopped, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Frank's voice came out broken. "She asked me to walk away, and I told her it was too late." He looked at Mabel with eyes that held 5 years of accumulated pain. "What if it is? What if I'm too far gone?" "Vincent didn't think so. Your mother didn't think so." Mabel stepped closer. "And I don't think so. You don't know what I've done, the people I've hurt. I know you come to a diner every morning to drink coffee you don't like because it reminds you of your father. I know you ask about my dreams like they matter. I know you're capable of gentleness even when the world tells you it's weakness." She touched his face, felt him lean into her palm like a man starving for tenderness. "That's who you are, Frank. Not what you've done, who you are." "And who am I?" "Someone worth saving." He pulled her close, then suddenly, desperately, not with the control he usually maintained, but with the raw need of someone drowning. His arms wrapped around her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. "Help me?" he whispered into her hair. I don't know how to stop being this. Then let me show you. They stood there among the tombstones as the sun set over Brooklyn. Two people trying to build something gentle in a world that rewarded violence. But the world wasn't finished with them yet. The black SUV appeared 3 days later. Mabel was closing the diner, locking the front door, when headlights cut through the darkness. Multiple vehicles, men emerging like shadows given form. She recognized one of them. The scarred man who'd interrupted her moment with Frank weeks ago. His name was S. Not her regular Sal the taxi driver, but Salvatore Costa, Frank's former underboss. Mabel Rossi, he said, approaching with predatory calm. We need to talk about Frank. I have nothing to say to you. That's unfortunate, because he's been making decisions that affect our business, decisions influenced by, he gestured at her, sentiment. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? S pulled out his phone, showed her a photo of Frank at the cemetery, holding her. Another photo of them at the diner, her bandaging his hand. He's going soft, talking about walking away, about dismantling operations, about peace. He said the word like it was poison. That's you, your influence. Maybe he's just tired of killing people. Men like Frank don't get tired. They get weak. And weak men get us all killed. S stepped closer. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to disappear. Take money. Take a new life. Take whatever you want, but you're going to leave Frank to us. No, that wasn't a request. Mabel's heart hammered, but she stood her ground. Then I guess you'll have to make me. S smiled, cold, calculating. We were hoping you'd say that. The other men moved closer, surrounding her. Mabel's hand found her phone in her pocket, fingers fumbling for Frank's number. A car engine roared, headlights blazed. Frank's Escalade crashed through the circle of men like a missile, scattering bodies. He emerged from the driver's seat with a gun in each hand, his expression pure murder. Touch her, he said quietly, and I'll make what happened to Torino look like mercy. The standoff hung in the air, weapons drawn, loyalties tested, violence balanced on a knife's edge. S raised his hand slowly. This is exactly what we're talking about, Frank. You're compromised, making emotional decisions. You're right. Frank's voice was ice. I am emotional, and right now, I'm emotionally invested in putting a bullet in anyone who threatens her. So you'll kill us, your own people. I'll kill anyone. That's what you made me. That's what I'm trying to stop being. He glanced at Mabel, something softening in his eyes. But if you force me to choose between my old life and the only person who makes me want a new one, there's no choice. Mabel stepped forward, placing herself between Frank and the guns. Stop, all of you. This isn't how this ends. Mabel, no. She turned to face S. You think I'm making him weak? Maybe I am. Maybe kindness is weakness in your world. But look at him. She gestured at Frank. Really look. Is this the face of a weak man? Or is this someone strong enough to walk away from power because he finally understands what it cost? S studied Frank, saw something that made him pause. You want out? He said finally, not a question. I want peace, Frank replied. I want to wake up without blood on my hands. I want. He looked at Mabel. I want a chance to be someone she doesn't have to be afraid of. They won't let you walk away clean. You know too much. You've done too much. Then I'll face whatever comes. But on my terms. Frank lowered his guns. I'm done building empires. Tell the families I'm retiring. Tell them Brooklyn is open territory. Tell them whatever you want, but tell them Frank Callie died with his father. S laughed. Bitter. Disbelieving. For a waitress? You're throwing away everything for a waitress. No, Frank said softly. I'm throwing away nothing to keep everything that matters. The tension held for another heartbeat. Then S holstered his weapon. You're a fool, Frank. Probably. But I'm a fool who might actually sleep tonight. S and his men retreated to their vehicles. Engines starting, taillights disappearing into Brooklyn's darkness. When they were gone, Frank finally breathed. He turned to Mabel, cupped her face in his hands. Are you okay? She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. I meant what I said. I'm walking away from all of it. Frank, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you were right. This isn't who I want to be anymore. He pressed his forehead to hers. Teach me how to be the man my mother wanted. The one you deserve. Mabel's tears finally fell. We'll learn together. And there, in the shadow of Luna's diner, under streetlights that had witnessed countless crimes, Frank Callie kissed her, not with possession or dominance, but with the tender desperation of someone being reborn. Walking away from an empire, Mabel quickly learned, was more complicated than simply deciding to leave. The first week after Frank's declaration, 3 attempts were made on his life. Not by us, he'd kept his word about stepping back, but by rivals who saw vulnerability as opportunity. Men who'd feared Frank Callie for years suddenly sensed blood in the water. Frank handled each attempt with the brutal efficiency that had made. He was becoming legendary, but each violent act took a visible toll. Not physically. He was far too skilled for that, but spiritually. Mabel saw something dimming inside him each time he resorted to violence. How do I stop being good at the one thing that's destroying me? He asked one night, head in his hands, sitting in her tiny apartment. They were spending more time there, away from the diner, away from the ever-watchful eyes of others. Her apartment had become their sanctuary, the only place where Frank could remove his armor and simply be Francesco, the young man who'd wanted to teach, the man who was now trying to remember how. You don't have to be perfect, Mabel said, sitting beside him on her worn couch. You just have to keep choosing differently. I've made so many wrong choices. How do I even know if I'm capable of making the right ones? He sounded so lost, so unsure. She took his scarred hands in hers, her touch gentle and reassuring. Because you're here. Because you're trying. That's already a choice your mother would be proud of. Frank looked at their joined hands, his marked by violence and years of fighting, hers stained with coffee and the marks of hard work. I don't deserve you, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Maybe not, she said softly, but you're here anyway. He laughed, a real laugh that reached his eyes, erasing some of the shadows that always seemed to be lurking there. You're brutally honest, you know that? Someone has to be, she countered gently. Everyone else is too afraid of you. You're not afraid? Mabel considered this for a moment. I'm terrified, just not of you. I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid that one of these attempts on your life will succeed. I'm afraid that, her voice caught, barely a whisper, that I'll choose the violence because it's easier than choosing you. She nodded, acknowledging her fear and the vulnerability it exposed. Frank shifted closer, turning to face her fully. The dim lamplight cast shadows across his features, making him look younger, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. Mabel, he began, his voice low and earnest. I've spent 5 years building walls, burying everything soft inside me because softness got people killed. My mother, my father, everyone I tried to protect by being harder, meaner, more ruthless than anyone else. You don't have to protect me that way, she said quietly, meeting his gaze. I know. That's what scares me, he admitted, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Because protecting you the right way with trust, honesty, and partnership, that requires being the person I buried. And I don't know if I remember how. Then remember this, Mabel said softly, bringing his hand to her chest, over her heart. Feel that. That's what it's like to be near someone you care about. Not possess, not control, just care about. Frank's eyes darkened with emotion as his hand spread across her chest, feeling her heartbeat accelerate under his touch. It's fast, he observed, his voice thick with emotion. You make me nervous, she confessed. I don't want to make you nervous, he said, struggling with the words. I want to make you feel safe, happy. Like your dreams matter. Like you matter. I do feel that way, she assured him. When you're like this, when you're just Frank, not the boss, not the legend, just the man who drinks coffee he doesn't like because it makes him feel close to his father. Something broke open in Frank's expression, a dam finally giving way. I love you, he confessed, The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that expanded, changed everything between them. Mabel's breath caught in her throat. Frank, I know I shouldn't. I know I have no right. I know I'm still covered in the wreckage of my old life. But I love you, Mabel Rossi, he continued, ignoring her protests. His voice filled with a raw honesty. I love how you see people. How you cut toast into triangles like it's an act of devotion. How you look at me like I'm someone worth saving, even when I know I'm not. You are worth saving, she insisted, her voice trembling. Maybe, he conceded, but that's not why I love you. I love you because you make me want to be worth it. You make me want to wake up and choose the light instead of the darkness. You make me believe that maybe, just maybe, the boy who collected pennies isn't completely dead. Tears streamed down Mabel's face, a mixture of joy and disbelief. I love you too, she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. God help me. I love you too. Frank cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. Say it again, he pleaded softly. I love you, Francesco Costa, she repeated, her voice stronger now, filled with conviction. I love the man you are, the man you were, and the man you're trying to become. He kissed her, soft at first, tentative, as if he were afraid she might break. But Mabel pulled him closer, deepening the kiss, pouring 5 years of loneliness and 3 months of growing feelings into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Frank rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, he whispered, his voice filled with uncertainty. The normal relationship thing, the building a life thing. Neither do I, Mabel admitted. We'll figure it out together. What if I fail? He asked, his voice laced with fear. What if I slip back into who I was? Then I'll be there to remind you who you are, she promised. And you'll do the same for me when I forget I'm more than just a waitress drowning in debt. Frank smiled, a genuine, full smile that transformed his entire face. You're so much more than that, he whispered, his voice filled with love. You're the woman who resurrected a dead man's heart. They spent the rest of the night talking about everything and nothing. Frank told her about the teacher he'd wanted to be, the books he'd loved, the life he'd imagined before violence became his language. Mabel shared her dreams of painting, of galleries, of creating beauty instead of just serving it. As dawn broke over Brooklyn, painting Mabel's apartment in soft gold light, Frank held her close on the couch. I have to tell you something, he said quietly, his voice suddenly serious. There's a hearing next week. The DA has been building a case. They want me to testify against the families in exchange for immunity. Mabel's stomach dropped. That's dangerous, she whispered, her voice filled with concern. It's necessary, he insisted. If I'm really walking away from that life, I need to burn the bridges so thoroughly there's no path back. He tightened his arms around her, his grip almost desperate. But it means going into witness protection for a while. Maybe months, maybe longer. We'll be separated. Yes, she acknowledged, her voice barely audible. Mabel turned in his arms, meeting his eyes, her gaze unwavering. Then we make these days count. Every morning, every conversation, every moment we make them count. And after, when it's over, we find each other again, no matter how long it takes. Frank kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, each kiss a promise. I'll find you, Mabel, he vowed, his voice filled with determination. Even if I have to search the whole world, even if it takes years, I'll find you. Promise? She whispered, her voice filled with hope. I promise, he affirmed, sealing it with a kiss as the sun rose. Two people who'd found love in the least likely place, holding on to each other as the world they knew prepared to burn down around them. Because loving Frank Callie meant accepting that nothing would be easy. But as Mabel discovered that morning, wrapped in his arms while Brooklyn woke outside her window, some things worth having were worth fighting for, even if the fight never truly ended. Don't let their story end in silence. Subscribe now because not every sinner gets a chance to love clean. If you'd still walk away, Tell us in the comments why some hearts don't deserve saving. 6 months later, Mabel stood outside Luna's diner with a paintbrush in her hand and tears in her eyes, emotions welling up from the depth of her soul. The renovation had taken 3 months, each day a testament to her resilience and determination. Lou, finally succumbing to age and weariness, had sold her the place, no longer able to fight the inevitable decline of the once thriving diner. With the money Vincent had unexpectedly left her in his will, a surprise that still brought tears to her eyes, she transformed the fading relic into something new, something filled with hope and promise. The sign above the door no longer read Luna's. It read Vincent's Place, a tribute to the man who had seen the good in her, the man who had inadvertently brought her and Frank together. The interior glowed with warm, inviting light, a beacon in the Brooklyn street. She'd kept the original booths, the heart and soul of the diner, but reupholstered them in a deep, rich burgundy, adding a touch of elegance and warmth. The sticky linoleum floor was gone, replaced with warm hardwood, a subtle upgrade that transformed the entire space. The walls, once dingy and gray, now displayed local art, showcasing the talent of the community, including several of her own paintings, finally finished after years of gathering dust, a testament to her rediscovered passion. But Booth 7 remained exactly as it was, Vincent's booth, a silent tribute to the man who had always occupied it. A small brass plaque adorned the table, engraved with the words, "Reserved for those who need kindness," a reminder of Vincent's generosity and compassion. The diner had reopened 2 weeks ago to surprising success, the community eager to embrace the transformed space. Word had spread about the waitress who'd loved a mobster's father and transformed a dying diner into something hopeful, a testament to the power of love and second chances. People came for the story, drawn by the promise of something extraordinary, but they stayed for the food and the warmth Mabel had always offered, the same kindness and genuine connection that had always defined her. Brenda still worked there, softer now, her sharp edges softened by time and the diner's transformation, telling stories about the old days to anyone who'd listen, her voice filled with a mixture of nostalgia and pride. Sal, the taxi driver, still ordered his 2 eggs over easy every morning, a creature of habit and a loyal customer. The nurses from the nearby hospital still traded gossip over pancakes, their laughter filling the diner with a sense of camaraderie and belonging. But every morning at 7:30, without fail, Mabel still poured 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, a ritual of self-care, and one for the empty seat at the counter, just in case, her heart clinging to the hope that Frank would one day return. Frank had entered witness protection the week after their confession, the memory etched in her mind. She'd watched him walk away into federal custody, a scene she replayed countless times, watched him disappear into a system designed to erase people, to protect them by making them invisible. No contact, no updates, no guarantee he'd ever come back, the terms of his protection cold and unforgiving. The DA had been thrilled, Frank's testimony a crucial piece in dismantling 3 major crime families. Brooklyn's underworld had fractured, scattered, rebuilt itself into something smaller and less organized, a testament to Frank's bravery and sacrifice. Frank Cali had vanished as if he'd never existed, a ghost in the city he once ruled. Mabel touched the locket around her neck, a tangible reminder of Frank's love, a gift from him before he left, containing a photo of Vincent and Maria, young and in love, their smiles radiating joy. On the back, he'd engraved a message, a testament to their connection. For the boy with pennies, for the teacher he'll become, signed with his initial, F. She'd learned to live with absence, the constant ache of Frank's absence a part of her daily life. She'd learned to find joy in the diner, in her art, in the community she'd built, pouring her energy into creating something beautiful and lasting. She'd learned that love didn't always look like Hollywood endings, that life wasn't always a fairy tale. Sometimes it looked like holding space for someone, even when they couldn't be there, keeping their memory alive in her heart. The bell above the door chimed, breaking her reverie. Mabel turned, expecting the morning rush of customers, and froze, her heart leaping into her throat. A man stood in the doorway, plain gray jacket, jeans, no expensive suit, no bodyguards, a stark contrast to the man she remembered. His hair was slightly longer, touched with more silver, a sign of the passage of time. He wore glasses, wire-rimmed and professorial, adding an air of gentleness to his features. But those eyes, she'd know those eyes anywhere, even after all this time. "Frank?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile sound lost in the bustling diner. He smiled, nervous, hopeful, completely different from the dangerous man who'd first walked through that door a lifetime ago. "Actually, it's Francesco now," he corrected gently, his voice tinged with nervousness. "I'm going back to my mother's name, Francesco Costa." Mabel's hands trembled, the reality of his presence almost too much to bear. "You're really here," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm really here," he confirmed, his voice filled with emotion. He stepped inside, looking around at the transformed space, his eyes taking in every detail. "You did this?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. "It's beautiful. Vincent left me money," she explained, her voice trembling. "I couldn't just. I had to make something good from it." Francesco's eyes landed on booth 7, on the brass plaque that honored Vincent's memory. His face crumpled briefly, a wave of emotion washing over him, before he composed himself, his expression softening. "He'd love this?" he said softly, his voice filled with affection. "There's coffee." Mabel gestured to the counter, her movements automatic, muscle memory taking over. "If you want some, is there room for one more cup?" The words hung between them, an echo of her longing, an outline of the ending she'd imagined but never believed would come true. "Only if you pour the second round," she managed, her voice choked with emotion, tears streaming freely down her face now, a torrent of relief and joy. Francesco crossed the diner in 3 steps and pulled her into his arms, his embrace familiar and comforting. He smelled different, less expensive cologne, more simple soap, a reflection of his new life. He felt different, too, less rigid, more relaxed, the tension that had always been present in his body now gone. But his embrace was the same, a desperate tenderness she remembered and had longed for. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry it took so long. The trial ran over and then protective custody." He began to explain. "You're here now," she interrupted softly, her voice filled with forgiveness. "That's what matters." He pulled back just enough to see her face, his hands framing her cheeks, his eyes filled with love and regret. "I have so much to tell you," he said, his voice urgent. "They set me up with a new identity. I'm teaching now high school English literature. Can you believe it? Me, teaching teenagers about Shakespeare." Mabel laughed through her tears, the sound filled with joy and disbelief. "Your mother would be so proud," she said, her voice filled with affection. "I think about her every day," he confessed, his voice softening. "And my father and you." He kissed her forehead, his touch gentle and reverent. "Especially you. Every morning I'd wake up and think about you pouring coffee in this diner, waiting for me. And it kept me going," she finished, her voice filled with emotion. "I poured you coffee anyway, every morning at 7:30, just in case." Francesco's eyes glistened, tears welling up. "Show me," he whispered, his voice filled with love. She led him to the counter, to the 2 cups she'd prepared out of habit and hope, a testament to her unwavering faith. They sat side by side on the red vinyl stools, the same stools where they'd first built their fragile connection, where their unlikely love story had begun. "2 new beginnings," Francesco said, raising his cup, his voice filled with optimism. "2 old kindnesses," Mabel replied, clinking hers against his, a toast to their shared past and their promising future. They drank together as morning light streamed through the window, painting everything gold, a symbol of hope and renewal. "So what happens now?" Mabel asked, her voice filled with anticipation, her heart pounding in her chest. Francesco set down his cup and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. "Now?" he said, his eyes locking with hers. Now I do what I should have done months ago. He slid off the stool and, impossibly, wonderfully, got down on one knee, his gesture both familiar and surreal. Mabel's heart stopped, her breath catching in her throat. I don't have a ring yet, he confessed, his voice shaking with emotion. I don't have much of anything, actually. Just a studio apartment and a teacher's salary and a second chance I don't deserve. His voice shook, the weight of his past bearing down on him. But I have love, Mabel. I have so much love for you that sometimes I don't know what to do with it all. You saved me, he continued, his voice filled with gratitude. You saw the person I could be when I'd forgotten he existed, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you weren't wrong. Francesco, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Marry me, please. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with love and hope. Let me wake up every morning and pour you coffee, he pleaded. Let me cut your toast into triangles. Let me be the man who makes you smile the way you made my father smile. Let me. His voice broke, overcome with emotion. Let me love you the way my mother loved my father. Purely, completely, without darkness. Mabel pulled him up and kissed him deep, certain, full of yes and always and forever. A kiss that sealed their fate. When they broke apart, she was laughing and crying simultaneously, tears of joy streaming down her face. Yes, she cried, her voice filled with happiness. Yes, I'll marry you. On one condition, she added, a playful glint in her eyes. Anything, he vowed, his voice filled with devotion. You have to help me run this place, she insisted, her voice firm. Vincent's place needs both of us. Francesco looked around the diner, at the art on the walls, at booth 7 with its brass plaque, at the customers starting to filter in for breakfast. His expression filled with wonder. A mobster turned teacher and a waitress turned artist running a diner together. That's quite a story, he mused, his voice filled with amusement. It's our story, Mabel corrected, her voice filled with love and determination. And it's just beginning. The bell above the door jingled as more customers arrived, drawn by the scent of coffee and the promise of a warm welcome. Brenda walked in for her shift, took one look at them, and burst into tears, overcome with emotion. I knew it, she exclaimed, her voice filled with joy. I knew he'd come back. Sal, the taxi driver, ordered his 2 eggs over easy and left his usual tip, but added an extra 20 with a note scrawled on a napkin. For the happy ending. Some people deserve them. The nurses applauded, their cheers echoing through the diner. The construction crew whistled, their boisterous celebration adding to the joyful atmosphere. Luna's, no, Vincent's place, filled with the sound of celebration. A testament to the power of love and second chances. Francesco and Mabel stood behind the counter, hands intertwined, pouring coffee and cutting toast, building the life that violence had tried to prevent. Their love a beacon of hope. Outside, Brooklyn hummed its endless song, a symphony of city life. Inside, love had the last word, its transformative power evident in every corner of the diner. Because sometimes kindness doesn't just save one person, it ripples out. Sometimes it saves 2, uniting them in a bond that can't be broken. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it saves everyone who witnesses it, inspiring them to believe in the power of love and the possibility of redemption. Vincent's fedora still sat on the shelf behind the counter, next to the coffee filters, a silent sentinel, a reminder of where it all started, of the unlikely beginnings that had brought them to this moment. A reminder of the old man who'd taught a waitress that small gestures matter, that kindness can change the world. Of the son who'd learned that empires built on blood always crumble, that violence ultimately destroys. But love, real love, endures, its power transcending time and circumstance. As the morning rush swelled around them, the diner buzzing with activity, Francesco leaned close to Mabel and whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. Thank you. For what? She asked, her voice soft, her eyes searching his. For cutting my father's toast, he whispered, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. For seeing past the monster, for believing in me, for teaching me that redemption isn't about forgetting who you were, but about choosing who you'll become. Mabel squeezed his hand, her touch filled with love and reassurance. We chose each other, she said, her voice filled with conviction. That's all that matters. And as the sun climbed higher over Brooklyn, casting its golden light upon the city, Vincent's Place, a diner built on kindness, saved by love, and blessed by the ghost of an old man who'd believed in both, became exactly what it was always meant to be: home. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.